Hi everyone, so I've been playing a lot of different builds lately to try out some more min-max setups, and one of them was the Chain Lightning Andariel Sorc. I had a ton of fun with this setup and I want to show you what it's all about. I managed to farm Pit 101 in around 90 seconds or so, roughly plus minus, and I've also managed to complete a tier 8 Horde in a relatively decent time. It takes like 2-3 minutes on the boss with my setup, but I'm also playing this on hardcore, so I'm trying to be a bit safer. On softcore and with like a bit more optimized setup, you can definitely get to the point where tier 8 hordes are not really a big deal anymore, including the boss fights, probably in the range of like 1 to maybe 2 minutes or so. So overall, this is actually a relatively strong build, especially if you have played a lot of Lightning Spear Sorc and you're looking for something new. It is not as powerful as Lightning Spear Sorc, which just kind of rules Season 5 right now, but maybe you are getting bored of it. This is what happened to me. I just wanted to try something else. I've played Chain Lightning Andariel Sorc in Season 4 already, actually, and I'm very happy to see that this kind of made its way into the top meta of the Sorc, pretty much. So I've been playing mostly Northar setup from Maxro. He has done a pretty good job there with this guide, and the final version of this includes the Andariel's Visage, which, together with the Axial Conduit, the new unique pants for the Chain Lightning, actually produces lots of these raw damage effects. We don't really care that much about the chain lightning damage itself. Instead, we proc stuff all the time, either from the poison from the Andariel's Visage or the pants that has this mana consumption effect, where then you get those big lightning explosions that you can see here. And together with the starlight aspect and all these insane amounts of hits that we are doing, we get tons of life per hit procs from our Andariels that gives us resources back from the healing that we would receive, since we are usually full life, and we see our mana bar going up and down all the time, multiple times per second. This is because of this crazy amount of hits that we do, and it's generally just a really cool and interesting setup, and I will show you what it's all about. So I have my planner here. This is also something you can find on my Discord. I have a channel with all of the planners there, the Woody Builds channel. If you're there, I recommend you go join, and this is always where you find my stuff. This is pretty much the Chain Lightning Sorc endgame guide from Northar here. So I took his setup as a starting point. I went straight to the Mythic variant because I already had a Sorc and pretty much geared up, and I had the Andariels lying around, so I just went straight for this here. But if you are starting a fresh Sorc, then you might want to check out the leveling guides, and also here the starter variants, leveling before the uniques, and so on. So this is all described in this setup. I will be mostly focusing on the endgame version that I've been playing lately in my video here. But you can also find the different setups here in the planner, so starter, leveling, and so on. This kind of shows you the progression. There is quite a difference in the setups. With, first of all, you start with no uniques, so you don't have Axial Conduit, and you have to rely mostly on the Chain Lightning damage. And then later this kind of like falls more and more into the background when you get those uniques. And then Axial Conduit is gonna pop off those big explosions, and then eventually you're gonna get to the point with the Andariels also coming in, giving you those poison triggers. If I have to guess, I would say Andariels does roughly half or so of the overall damage in the late game, and most of the other half comes from the Axial Conduit explosions, and then a little bit from the remaining like chain lightnings that you throw out, and then the unstable current procs that shoot out more lightning spears and charge bolts and so on. So if I had to guess, maybe the raw chain lightning part is like, I don't know, 10 to 20%. And Axial Conduit maybe like 20 to 30, and then half or so is like Andariels. So this is kind of the damage distribution here, and you can also see that once you get to the point where you have Andariels, you have a pretty huge upgrade in the setup. Number one, because of the life on hit, that combines with the starlight aspect, giving you like this insane resource engine. As you saw in the clip at the start, it just goes up and down all the time. So whenever Axial Conduit drains your mana, you get it all back. So the more you can generate resources, the more you can sustain those chain lightnings with those pants. Effectively, what the paints do is the more chain lightnings you cast, the more mana it drains of you for each chain lightning that's out. So the mana consumption goes through the roof, but thanks to all these hits you're doing, you also get all of the mana back with the Starlight aspect. So once you get Andariels online, then this is kind of the main resource engine, and it kind of sustain itself. And if you invest into this with masterworking and you have good gear, then it really pops off. Before that, you cannot really sustain the Axial Conduit that well, but there is another way. So you can see this here, for example, there is the warmth ranks. So if you are in the presence of burning enemies, in particular bosses, then you get a lot of healing per second. And you can temper warmth ranks here on the gear. So while you still have a lot of legendaries equipped, this is kind of your resource engine here. So you can use those warmth ranks, you can even put points into this if you want, and then use the starlight aspect, and you have this passive healing depending on how many enemies are nearby that also fuels this resource engine. So especially once you have, for example, the Axial Conduit, but maybe not the Andariels just yet, then here you see this, there's the pants, and warmth plus starlight will fuel your resources in that case. And later on it's the Andariels. Andariels also has a nice upside. It has tons of attack speed, so you can spam your spells a lot more. You can get more lucky hit procs, giving more Andariel procs, and you can also get the 4th Tarasha stack. So Tarasha wants you to use up to 4 different elements. We are Sorc, so we have lightning, cold, and fire anyway, so that's quite easy to achieve. And then the 4th one comes from the poison here. So there's not many ways of getting it, and Andariels has this extra effect together with Tarasha's ring. So that's kind of how the main combo works in the late game once you have everything complete, especially if you have Andariels lying around. I would say Tyr's Might is really nice as well, but it's mostly just defense, and it's mostly only useful for the higher Infernal Hordes. I don't think they really need this, for example, in the pit. You can't get away without this if you are not going to like tier 8 or tier 7 Hordes. Or if you are careful, you can do tier 7s probably, but you want to be mindful of the firebolts from the Desecrators. And then the Starless Skies ring is fairly optional as well. So if you don't have this, I would say don't worry too much about it. The core skill ranks don't matter too much. As I mentioned, the damage of Chain Lightning in total is not really all that high, and it's mostly coming from the 2 unique items here. But what is nice about this ring is just like it gives you a 50% pretty much unconditional buff to everything. The resource effect is kind of whatever, since you don't have trouble casting Chain Lightning, and for example the Starless effect also doesn't reduce the mana drain induced by the Axial Conduit. So it's just, you know, a slightly lower cost for casting a Chain Lightning, which doesn't matter all too much when you gain and spend like hundreds of mana per second basically in the late game in like big packs. So yeah, kind of whatever. It's just nice stats here. You can replace this with like any other like offensive power, something like Shredding Blades or Stormswell or something like that. We have Stormswell here actually, so Shredding Blades would be my candidate here to just have an extra offensive power again. That might help you out. You might notice there's not even like a Chain Lightning power in this entire setup in the late game, so we have just so many uniques. There's the 2 unique rings, there's a unique glove, and then we have only 2 aspects left if we go for a 2-handed weapon. Why did we go for a 2-handed weapon? Well, mostly to buff this Stormswell aspect. It's one of the more powerful aspects. You could play this with one hand and offhand as well if you wanted, and then can get an extra aspect there or some extra cooldown there. You also get a bit of lucky hit for the Andariels. So that is an option. You don't have to go for the stuff, but I would recommend it. You also have the Orange Herald aspect here. This is very nice to just reset your ultimate. So in this case, the Unstable Currents. It has a 70 seconds base cooldown, and we don't really fit a lot of cooldown reduction in here, as you can see. So there's maybe some cooldown you can get on the neck, a little bit on the Tarasha, and this is it. And you still can get to the point where you have permanent unstable currents, and this is thanks to the Orange Herald aspect. You just have produced so many lucky hits with all these chain lightnings going out, and then while unstable currents is going, you also have all these other lightning spells popping out when you cast chain lightning. And even on single target, you can get to the point where you sustain your unstable currents permanently. And this is without overflowing energy. We actually play Veer's Mastery here. This gives us the 25% damage reduction. It gives us also roughly 25% damage increase, at least for our Chain Lightnings. It does not work for the Andariels proc as far as I'm aware, because it cannot crit. And I'm not sure about the Axial Conduit. As far as I know, some of the item procs cannot work with this, but it's still not really necessary to go overflowing energy anyway, so we just use it at the very minimum for the damage reduction, and it also gives a bit of a damage benefit to the Chain Lightning itself. What's also nice about the setup is that with the Ice Armor and the Shimmering Ice Armor upgrade, we have permanent Ice Armor relatively easily. We have a lot of attack speed to spam those Chain Lightnings, and every time you spend 50 mana while Ice Armor is active, you get 1 second off its cooldown. So you get to the point that, again, with relatively little cooldown reduction in the setup, we have permanent Ice Armor just by doing this. You can also go for Mystical Ice Armor if you like to have a bit of a burst phase for example, staggered bosses. There's also some weird double dipping bucket going on. If you want to increase your boss damage a little bit and you feel totally fine with no permanent Ice Armor, then this would actually help you out here, especially against those boss fights. But I really like the comfiness of the perma Ice Armor, very easily achieved through this. There's also a bunch of other good defensive tools. Mana Shield is basically always up. Align the Elements is very strong, like Sorc based defense. And we also have the protection here, so we want to try to cycle some of our cooldowns a little bit. Again, we have the Ice Armor resets, we have teleports, we have Flame Shield there, Ice Blades that we can cast once in a while, and then the Unstable Currents also. It lasts 10 seconds, and it should also come back in those 10 seconds, so you can cycle various cooldowns and try to keep up the protection barrier all the time. If you feel like you have a bit of trouble with the barrier uptime, you should never let the barriers drop, but you can, for example, take out a few points from teleport and then go into Icy Veil. That gives you a bit more leeway to work with your barriers and makes it easier to sustain those. For your enchants, one really important enchant is the Firebolt enchant. This goes into many Sorc builds, including this one. We do a lot of our damage without crits, but yeah, not all of it. So you want to get Devouring Blaze online, and you get this very easily by just having Firebolt enchant that just burns enemies for you. There's also some Paragon nodes that have a lot of burning damage reduction. I actually picked up a lot of this here. So there's the Burning Instinct board that has a rare buff node for a lot of damage reduction here. There's also like small nodes there, and in other various places we also have some burning damage reduction. So here, for example, on the Searing Heat board, I picked this up. In general, you are pretty defensive, even though the setup looks like it has relatively low life, 25k. On hardcore, I actually play with pretty much this number as well. I have 26, I believe. This is because you have a lot of raw damage reduction in the setup, partly from this burning enemies thing that, well, at least works against most hits that will damage you. But you also have Tyrio's Might that gives you this extra maximum res. Yes, damage reduction here. We have the Axial Cornet. You want to try to work on this damage reduction modifier as well. So once you masterwork this up, this gives you a lot of DR. And well, you have the barriers that you cycle. So that's why I like this comfy perma ice armor, for example. It just makes it very easy to survive. I had no trouble whatsoever so far, even on hardcore, playing with this little life. For your second enchantment, we have actually various options. I have the Chain Lightning enchant here. This was supposed to get nerfed to get a 4 seconds cooldown, but that never happened, it seems. So this is an option if you want to get a bit more Chain Lightnings out. But again, this is also only something you can do when you really have a lot of resource income, basically, from resource generation here and the starlet aspect. And once you have the full engine online, you can kind of do that, but it's not a crazy boost. You can get away with other stuff. For example, Teleport enchant. This is what I do a lot for paid 101 speedruns, for example, or like Hell Tides, whatever. Anything where you want to go fast, Teleport enchant is really nice. In fact, you can also improve this with, you know, either teleport cooldown reduction or something like evade cooldown reduction tempers. You can put this on the neck, you can put this on the boots, and then you can go real fast if you're like more speed farming. And otherwise, you can also do just an Ice Blades enchant to get more of those conjurations out and more Ice Blades that help reset the cooldown of the Ice Blades, help reset cooldown of all of your other skills with the summoned Ice Blades here. And this is also a pretty good option, especially for like the higher end content. I've been using this a little bit. And the Paragon board here. So I made my own board because I wanted to be a bit more defensive for hardcore. Northar has more of a softcore board, I would say. So you can also check this. It's a very good Paragon board if you want to have a bit more offense. So he has like, I think, an extra glyph or two that I don't have, and I picked up more defensive stuff. But other than that, you can choose either like the board from the guide here or then my own. So I just tried to tweak it a little bit for hardcore, basically, since I didn't feel too safe with 25k life. But it turns out with those changes and those adjustments I made, I feel pretty good about my Chain Lightning Sorc right now. The main things to look out for here are some of the glyphs. So we have Elementalist, Reinforced. Elementalist gives you this triple element effect. So you try to get a regular hit with each of the elements. In that case, cold comes from the Ice Blades, and then lightning we do anyway, and fire from the Firebolt. Reinforced gives us damage reduction with a barrier up, so you always want to try to cycle those barriers, partly for that reason as well. We have Unleash Gift, gives us mana regen, so this helps us a bit, and also easy activation of an extra damage buff. We have the Flame Peter glyph here. We burn everything anyway from the Firebolt, so you get a nice burning damage effect. We have the Tactician glyph here. This is another damage buff for a few seconds. This is actually 8 seconds, I think, with this setup. Yes, so for every skill that is not on the bar from the defensive category, you get plus 4 seconds. So this is an 8 seconds, 10% damage buff when you use any of your defensive skills, Teleport, Ice Armor, or Flame Shield. And since you use Ice Armor roughly around maybe 8 seconds or something like that, depending on if you spec into Icy Veil, you'll basically have that effect. And here's Exploit. We make everything vulnerable very easily with the Static Surge. This is kind of like easy, vulnerable by default, and it gives you a bit of mana back whenever you spam chain lightnings. So this is your source of vulnerable in this setup. You use the exploit glyph to go with this and get another damage buff. And there's also another Paragon out here, the Frigid Fate. Very important Paragon board. This asks you to stack cold damage. And you might be wondering, why do we do this? Well, Frigid Fate is a generic multiplier. It works for everything as long as the target is vulnerable. And we don't actually go for cold damage, we go for non-physical damage. So you can see this here, you want to try to hit 300%, because you get 20% of that as a multiplier up to 60%. And you can get this a lot from Tarasha's Ring, so you get a lot of here. And then we also have Paragon nodes. So there's like a bunch of Paragon nodes all over the place. So here, for example, the Enchantment Master board, there's non-physical damage. Here's non-physical damage. We have the Elementalist buffing this here. There's also non-physical damage, non-physical damage. So this way you get most of this plus the ring. Now for your stats on your gear, there is not really that many items that you can actually really adjust, and at least in the final version. There's a lot of uniques here. There's only 3 legendaries. And well, you want to go for a double cast on a chain lightning. You want to try to stack vulnerable damage. You might be wondering why vulnerable. Well, it just kind of buffs everything that we do. Since you make everything vulnerable very easily, there's not really any crazy tempers for, you know, a certain thing. Instead, we want to try to buff everything: the axial, the Andariels, and the chain lightning damage itself. So vulnerable kind of fits in there. Here we want a bit of armor on our boots, because there's not really much opportunity besides putting skulls when you have a Tyrael Smite. Tyrael Smite solves all of your res issues anyway, and as a Sorc it's fairly easy to get to maximum resistances, but maybe early on, especially if you're still leveling and so on, you might have to go for some res gems, and then you might have to invest a little bit more into armor. But late game, just one roll here is totally fine to get out of the skulls. And then we have our neck here. So ideally, you want a bunch of glass cannon ranks. This just buffs all of your damage, even though it also makes you squishier. It is totally fine. You want to try to invest in this. It's a very valuable passive. So if you get extra ranks here, this is nice. And then there's also Conjuration Mastery. We get a bunch of conjurations out from the lightning spears mostly. So when we have our Unstable Currents up, which is basically always, and we spam our chain lightning, then there's a 1 in 4 chance to get a lightning spear. So in that case, this lightning spear will give us the Conjuration Mastery while it's out, and you can get a few stacks of this, which is a very powerful passive. And of course, our ice plates. Our ice plates here, you can cast them whenever they're ready. And as I mentioned earlier, if you also have the enchant, you can get even more out of them and get more value out of this. Other than that, for your masterworking preferences, Andari's Visage, best case you have attack speed, otherwise life on hit I would recommend. Here you want to have 2 hits on the maximum all res and then 1 on the damage reduction. This is kind of the ideal outcome, but if you get like a double damage reduction, 1 max res, or even triple damage reduction, it is okay, I would say. Fist of Fate, you mostly care about the lucky hit here, so try to go for that. Otherwise, yeah, nothing really matters that much. Maybe the crowd control effects are okay. Here, I would say damage reduction and resource generation and maximum. So those are the 2 stats you're looking out for. Boots doesn't really matter much. Get a bit of life, get a bit of int, whatever suits you more here. And also don't worry much about the missing movement speed. You get a lot of movement speed in this setup. For example, from the Conjuration Mastery. And also whenever you teleport, you get a bit of a movement speed buff. So we have this here, for example. And you will generally be relatively fast anyway. For our weapon, I mentioned this earlier, the chain lightning casts twice. That's kind of the important thing here. And then the amulets, you want to get a bunch of ranks. There is also some other offensive passives, but none of them really fit in as well as those 2 here. So those are the top 2. And then there's stuff like Devouring Blaze, but it doesn't work for Andariels, for example. There's stuff like Hoarfrost, which is nice, but it only works if you freeze them, which you have to do with mostly the Fist of Fate procs. So it's also not really that great and doesn't work much on bosses. So yeah, you want to try to get maybe at least one of those 2 passes on your neck. And then also something like maybe Intelligence or cooldown reduction. And for your rings, cooldown reduction on the Tarashas. Otherwise, I would say non-physical damage is not terrible to hit. And here you can actually get a bunch of stuff, either the attack speed, depending on if you hit the cap already or not, together with your Andariels. And then like a hit chance is good for the Andariels procs. Crit chance is okay for your chain lightning stuff. So anything kind of works besides the core skills I would recommend. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you want to read up more details and especially the progression part of the guide, I do recommend you go check out this chain lightning guide here by Norfar. It is very in-depth. Has a lot of the explanations of what you might be looking for. It has like everything listed out here, especially for the earlier levels and the progression, and also some other variants like the speed farming. which is fairly similar to what I have just shown you, but mostly we go for teleport enchant, maybe do like a bit of like a tweaking here with the evade cooldown reduction. So example, he goes for this flicker step setup to get the attacks reduce evade cooldown faster, and together with you know, like a juicy evade cooldown reduction roll like this, you can actually get a lot of teleports from your teleport enchant. So this is like one way to do it, for example. And I also have you know, some speed farming variant here. This is pretty much what he has in the guide as well. So you can go check that out there. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this guide. I'll be back with more stuff for the remaining season 5, maybe some more on the Sorc. I was thinking about maybe also making a Hydra Sorc, so we'll see. But I also have a bunch of other stuff planned for the rogues in particular, and also maybe the druids. And I also just leveled a necro, and I'm planning to do a barb soon. So there was going to be some more videos. And of course, all of the expansion news that are coming. So hope you like this. Wish you good luck with the Chain Lightning Sorc if you enjoyed this guide. And I'll see you guys next time.